Hello and welcome to The Digital Insight, the technology, procurement and supply chain podcast that delivers valuable C-level perspective into the core issues surrounding business transformation and digital disruption. Each episode will bring you the most inspiring executive insights from those who are leading transformation strategies within the world's biggest and best-known companies. The Digital Insight. Disrupt, transform, evolve.
Welcome to The Digital Insight, the official podcast series for CPO Strategy and Interface magazines. Before we jump into today's episode, I just want to say that from all of us here at B2B Media, we hope that you and your loved ones are safe and well. We set out to keep you engaged and entertained by bringing you the most inspiring executive insight into the core issues surrounding business transformation, digital disruption, and procurement. So we hope that these continue to be a welcome distraction, whatever your situation is right now. In the Digital Insight hot seat today is Tania Seary, one of the most globally influential members of the procurement and supply chain world. Together, we discuss what made Tania fall in love with procurement and how Procurious, the world's first and leading online business network dedicated to procurement and supply chain professionals, was truly ahead of its time. Tania and I also explore how COVID-19 will be a truly defining moment in the future of procurement. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dale. I'm delighted to be here.
Nice, the pleasure's mine. And I always like to kick things off by just finding out a little bit about you yourself, so our listeners can understand who you are. So if you can, kind of in the best way you can, tell us a little bit about who Tania Seary is, and your procurement journey to where you are now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Well, I've been blessed with a fantastic career. I started in marketing, which I'm actually really still in marketing. That's what we do with Procurious. We're marketing the procurement profession, but I had a fantastic early career, worked with large companies like Walt Disney Company. I moved into industrial marketing with Alcoa, the aluminum company, and then had the opportunity to finish my master's in the US at Penn State and fell in love with procurement. So I went to the Smil College there of Operations and Logistics and just absolutely fell in love with procurement. So that was at the early 2000s when we were all looking at marketplaces and reverse auctions, and some of the first e-procurement came out. So that was a really rich experience. So 20 years later, I think we're in another cusp, which has been all the fantastic AI and cognitive work. But of course, right now we're in the middle of this COVID-19 crisis, which is challenging us again, but I think also presents a lot of opportunities. So that was my career in procurement.
No, and there's one thing that you said there that I hear quite a lot about, how no one sort of sets out to have a career in procurement. They sort of either fall into it or, like you say, fall in love with procurement. And I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but let's pick that apart a little bit and say, well, how can you fall in love with procurement? What was it about it that kind of made you think, oh, this is something I want to pursue further?
It's the scale and scope for me, Dale. I mean, I don't think there are many professions or functions that allow you to operate across the full breadth of the business. So you need to understand the customer, you need to understand the manufacturing and operations process, you need to understand the community and understand the supplier base that you're buying from, make sure that you're, buying from reputable sources. You also have the opportunity to do a lot of community good through social procurement. And then, of course, there's the internal issues like dealing with finance and managing up to the CFO. So I don't think there's that many roles in the corporate world that give you that scale and scope.
No, absolutely. And obviously I talk to a lot of people in procurement roles like yourself and who've had, and say similar things. They talk about that breadth and that scope and how the role touches every part of the business like no other role. And obviously, you said about over the course of your career about how the sort of focus has changed. You talked about looking at marketplaces originally, and now we're talking about sort of AI and that sort of thing. That sort of speaks to a broader transformation of procurement. I hate to use that word, but it is a word that everyone uses. and we start to hear things such as, well, procurement now is more strategic. It's central to a business. It's got a seat at the table. That's one that we hear a lot of. What does that mean? Based on your experience, what does that actually mean?
Well, look, I think, the second part to why I love procurement is that it's so commercial. And I think that's what we're seeing, that's where we should aspire to be, is the best commercial leaders in our respective businesses. And so at the moment, there's just so much opportunity for us to be working with external stakeholders to deliver so much value. There's a lot of creativity in procurement where you can really say, look, what's the business problem we're trying to solve here? It's not just about going to 3 suppliers. We've got a real business issue here. How can we creatively creatively create some sort of commercial solution that will deliver, exponential value? And I think that's what we're looking at the moment is the world is our oyster. Let's not waste a crisis. All the cards are in the air. So think outside the box and think about what solutions we can deliver to the C-level that previously may not have been able to obtain oxygen, but because people are looking for solutions, they may consider something quite creative.
Now, we'll touch upon that a little bit further a little later about obviously the current crisis. And like you said something really interesting about how obviously it is a crisis, but it's a moment of great opportunity. And I'm keen to explore that a little bit later. But for now, let's look at then, to quote what it says on Procurious, it's about, it's an opportunity for a procurement professional to make their mark in the procurement world by building an online, profile. Tell me a little about Procurious then. What is Procurious? How did it come about? And this will link quite nicely into that sort of pandemic conversation. Why do we need, in a moment right now, something like Procurious?
Well, look, I learned when I was working in these large corporates the value of bringing together all the business unit CPOs. So when you work in these large organizations, every business unit is like a company in its own right. So we used to bring together all the CPOs. And at first, people were reticent, as they are with social media and sharing. But once you build trust, people really start to open up and share their best ideas. And that's really what we try and do, in an online environment. Look, people are still hesitant about social media, but, we have a lot of people. We've got tens of thousands of people visiting Procurious every month. Very few of them share, but they're there watching, and we get a lot of feedback about the value of the information that we're providing, and we know that people are connecting with each other. So I think it's just a matter of building trust. And I think when we look at some of these major disruptive events, the floods in Thailand, the tsunamis, now we've got COVID, often you're the only person in your business who's managing that category. So you really do have to reach outside of your organization. And the Procurious platform gives you the opportunity to connect with people around the world who are managing your category. And what I like to say is that the more we use our community muscle, the stronger it will get. It's like any muscle. So the more the people reach out and seek help and ask questions, the stronger the community will become. So that's really why we started Procurious. Well, I started Procurious was to really take advantage of these online social tools and help the community learn from each other. Collaborative learning, if you like. So we've grown now. We've got nearly 40,000 members around the world. As I said, we've got tens of thousands of people visiting each month. We get a lot of great feedback. And, we're really buoyed. We've had a COVID-19 group which almost has 1,000 members. We're sending out daily news updates to them. We have information, community. So really, whatever the issue is, we can bring subsets of these 40,000 people together to feel like they belong.
No, absolutely. And, a key thing there that you mentioned is feedback. Is understanding what the people who are using it think of it. How important is it to have that, to be able to, because obviously with something like this, I guess obviously it's grown, it's proven successful. We can see how clearly that need is there. You can almost be guilty of just steering the ship on your own and not thinking about what the people want. So how important is it to have that constant engagement with the people interacting with it, so that it stays relevant? It's what people need and not what you think people need.
It's essential. And that's why myself and my team travel the world constantly. Conditions permitting, we're at most of the major professional, the keynote events around the world. We also, of course, have a face-to-face program. So, we have a roundtable program. And I think this is the important thing, is that, of course, face-to-face is always the most valuable part of networking. That's where you build your relationships. That's where you really begin to understand how your contacts or your network really thinks. But what I think the power of social media and the Procurious platform is that you can really speed up, I call it speed dating, but that process of getting to know who you actually should meet face-to-face with, and really understanding who are the people in your network that can really help you advance your career. So I think that you can do a lot of the lead work in identifying who are the top people that you need to connect with that will help your career. So we have a lot of face-to-face work, as well as what you see on the platform, because you really need both.
And that sort of takes me back to what you just said a moment ago then about that there are a lot of members who sort of use it to view what's on there, and they don't really post themselves. You talked about obviously that there's still sort of that kind of reluctance towards social media, because naturally people will see it. With as much as you try, there will always be someone who says it's just another social media platform, and obviously we know it's not. How do you kind of tailor the messaging and kind of reach out to those people who sometimes, because as much as you want to change some people's perceptions, you're going to come up against brick walls that just will not move. So how do you kind of
look, it doesn't really matter, because we're serving the 40,000 people who are interested. That's the key thing, is that there's, tens of thousands of people who are coming back every month to read the content and be active on the platform. And 40,000 professionals around the globe, I think that's an important audience. And you could say that these are sort of the thought leaders or the more proactive members of the profession. So they're actually the ones who do want to learn and do want to, value connecting with others. So I think that's the key thing, is that people sort of not vote with their feet. They click, and really demonstrate their interest. So, that's, as well as the feedback that we get, I think the fact that people are visiting, and, that's a significant number of our profession that are coming to expand their horizons, if you like, each month.
And how much, if at all, I guess it has, but how much has it changed since the idea in your head when you were plotting out what you wanted it to be, fast forward to today, just how much has it changed, and how much has that both been expected and also completely unexpected?
Well, look, to be honest, I think that it was an idea ahead of its time. I think that Procurious is really hitting its strides right now. We started this 6 years ago, and it probably was ahead of its time. We have the same functionality as we had when we started, and people aren't using all of it yet anyway. So I think we're now going to see a lot of the professional associations and other groups really head in the direction that Procurious has. If you look at our Big Ideas Summit, we've always had a digital delegate experience. Now everyone's having to go for a digital delegate experience. So, we're going to have a lot more competition in our space. But I feel fortunate that, I feel we've got a very committed community, and, we'll keep pushing ahead. I think the thing we've always been ahead of the curve on is our ability to look at procurement and supply chain with a very fresh set of eyes. And that sounds funny for someone who's been in the profession for 20 years, but the benefit of being in the profession for so long is that when something interesting comes along, we know what it looks like. So we can advise people on, what's the interesting story here? Where's the learning? Where's something people haven't heard before? And that's really what we're focused on. If you look at a lot of content out there, there's a lot of repetition. So we really want to excite the profession. We want to take a new spin. We want to appeal to those who are early adopters, I guess, and adapters. They don't necessarily have to be Generation Next, but they have to be forward thinking.
And I think you've touched an important part there about that repetition. I've spoken to a few people that, yes, everybody wants to champion what they do and engage and read about sort of success stories and how well things are going, and even, I don't want to use the word failures, but even things that aren't happening to plan. But there's that kind of
I don't know if you saw, Dale, but we've launched a campaign called Major Tech Fails, because the sort of feedback we get from people is we want to learn from others' mistakes. I've often heard that through our roundtable members. So we've actually launched a series with Matt Stewart from Rise Now about major tech fails, because we know how much people are losing money from failed procurement technology implementations, and we really want to help people. But that's not a headline that you would see anywhere else. It takes a bit of courage to come out with that, but that's what our community wants to hear. They want to hear the mistakes people have made and how they can avoid them and learn from them. So I think that's the sort of independence that we have. We're not sort of necessarily beholden to any preconceptions.
Yeah. No, that sounds fantastic, and as particularly somebody who writes a lot about the procurement space and talks to a lot of people, it might sound cynicism, but I actually get more insight, and I actually find more of the story is in those failures and is in those things where things have gone wrong, because actually, that's where the key learnings really are, and it's really great to hear that.
Well, and as the saying, people don't make the same mistake twice; they make them over and over again. And I think something about leadership, and I didn't really answer one of your earlier questions fully, is when we talk about the seat at the table and the C-suite and what have you, people have to make an active decision on what they want to do with their career. And my view is, if you want to be in that top 1%, you can't sit inside your own organisation and think that you're going to get there. If you think about corporate strategy and therefore procurement and supply chain strategy, by its very nature, it's about outwitting your competition. Now, how are you going to outwit your competition if you don't know what your competition is doing? So, people who sit inside their organisations and say, oh, well, I can't afford to do this, or I don't have time, or I'm not going to let my team network because they might get headhunted. I've heard all these stories. And the sad truth is that unless you are out in the business community, you're not going to get a competitive advantage because you don't know what you're competing against. So I often look at, the CPOs, the rising stars, and I look for, what sort of appetite do they have for learning? And, we're trying to attract people to the Procurious platform who are keen to learn. They're not territorial about their networks and what they know. They're sort of humbled by how much they don't know. And I think that defines, different types of leaders across our profession. And I think, those that are prepared and want to be at the C level should acknowledge, have a good dose of humility and knowledge that they don't have all the answers, but they've got a fabulous team and a fabulous network that'll help them find those answers. So sorry, I'm sort of on my pet hobby horse here about leadership, but that's just my view about getting a seat at the table and about career progression in this profession.
Now, something you said a little earlier, and you sort of mentioned it slightly in a different capacity just then, you mentioned about competitors, and something when you said about Procurious being ahead of its time, and then you also mentioned how now, I don't want to say competitors, but other platforms, other people have kind of are looking to build something similar. What does that do for you, and in terms of, I'm trying to think of the right word. Do you have to think about competing against these other platforms, or is it sort of you're glad to see other people joining that kind of similar platform situation? How do you view these other organizations, these other platforms? Do you see them as competitive?
Well, I think it's fantastic because it benefits the profession. So I'm seeing all these amazing procurement and supply chain influencers now on LinkedIn. They've got, tens of thousands of followers. We've got, some real influencers, people you can name and people can follow. And I just think that's fabulous because certainly when we started 6 or 7 years ago, there was nobody, we were like this sole voice. There might have been Peter Smith from Spend Matters and a couple of others, but now you have a plethora of people, with great profiles and bringing different insights to the profession. And the next generation or anyone in the profession will be attracted to different types of people and influencers. So it's important that we cover all the bases. And, I think competition's healthy. We're trying to raise the level and of professionalism in our profession. So the more competition for providing services and educating people, the profession can only benefit. So, that's always been my personal end objective. And, I've stuck to that. So, I think it's very positive. And let's face it, there's probably 10, 12, 15 million professionals in the world. So there's a lot of people to serve.
No, absolutely. So obviously then we have touched on it a little bit throughout, and it is a kind of the elephant in the room, but it's obviously the coronavirus and everything that's happening right now. And I remember speaking to somebody, about 3 to 4 weeks ago now, and that was I don't want to say it was at the start of it, because obviously it wasn't, but he talked about how at that moment in time, we had yet to see the true sort of impact on global supply chains, global procurement. And I think it's safe to say now we can already point to clear and obvious examples of how things have really been affected. Rather than looking at it as a sort of thing, because it is obviously quite a dark and it's unfortunate, it's not a very nice situation. But rather than focus on that part, let's look at some of the positives we can take out of it from a business standpoint. From a procurement perspective, and from even Procurious, what are some of the opportunities that have arisen and sort of the positives that can be taken away from it?
Oh, well, absolutely. Well, look, I think, we probably launched our group 6 or 7 months ago. So 6 or 7 weeks ago. Gee, we would have been had a lot of foresight if we had launched it 6 or 7 months ago. I think I closed our offices 6 weeks ago. I think when you're on social media all the time, you might pick up on these things. You're able to connect the dots a lot faster, and that's another benefit of keeping your mind open and being across all these things. But look, I think hopefully we've learned a tremendous amount. We're actually going to be launching a survey early next week to really gauge the response and the feedback from everyone. I think China's bounced back a lot faster than everyone expected, and we'll probably, given there's sort of to the US, a 14-week lead time, and there was only a 2 to 3 week really shutdown, I think. I mean, the ports have been the main issue there. It may just be a bit of a blip, but I think more than anything, it's been a huge scare yet again to sole sourcing from one geographical region. And we've just hosted a webinar, Is Mexico the New China? Of course, it's not got the scale of China, but for US buyers, I think Mexico is looking increasingly attractive. So that's sort of the challenge. I think the real challenge will be the overall downturn in demand and the economy. It won't be so much sources of supply. It will be, the reduced demand that will really slow everyone down, and probably is already. So I think this is where this creativity comes in, being able to harness resources, think creatively about new sources of supply, how to manage inventory in a different way. And I think this is what's going to be hugely exciting for the right type of personalities, that a lot of the sort of theories that we hold true and dear for supply chain are now going to be challenged. So we've all been working towards the leanest of inventory. Now we're going to be thinking more about buffer stock. We've all been trying to extend payment terms. Now we're going to be wanting to ensure that our suppliers are liquid. So we may be speeding up, and so many companies have sped up payment terms. Some of the big resources companies now are paying within 7 days. I think technology is going to have a big review, because we were all leaning towards, should we, be going best of breed and sort of cobble them together versus these huge ERPs. But I think something we've learned from COVID is that maybe we need the security of these large, infrastructure, sort of cloud-based, big players to give us the visibility that we need. So that's still a bit of a question mark. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the whole global sourcing, sole sourcing strategy will also be questioned. So it's going to be an interesting time. It's going to be a reset, I think, and will provide a whole lot of options, because the entrepreneurial suppliers will be jumping in and providing solutions where they see opportunities. So, yeah. I'm not sure if that answered your question, Dale, but, there's some thoughts from me.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like, it's kind of an impossible question, because we just don't know, do we? We can do all we can to kind of forecast as best as possible, and predict and sort of hope, but at the end of the day, we just don't know. And I think it's fascinating to hear from people like yourself.
Yeah, but this will be an experience that anyone in procurement and supply chain, anyone in business will never forget. So always at the back of their mind, there'll be a what if scenario that prior to this point, nobody ever considered, this to be a scenario to this extent. So, this will be a hallmark of this generation of professionals, that they've lived through this, and it will always be something that they think about as they plan moving forward. We're going to have to be a lot more conservative.
Well, you make an extremely important point there about up until this point. So let's just say the last 5, 6, even up to 10 years, businesses have been spending a lot of money and reinvigorating their supply chain and making all their procurement functions, to as mature as possible and with the best practices. And then here comes the biggest test that they could never have seen. What do you think, moving forward, this is going to do in terms of that? I think so there's the integrity of procurement that's kind of obviously developed and grown and become more, it's become more strategic. It's become this much a key function. Moving forward, that's just going to continue. It's going to be even more like more and more businesses are going to say, you know what, that's absolutely right. Procurement and supply chain is essential more than we ever thought it was.
Absolutely. And I mean, the three letters PPE have never been muttered outside most factories. So, I mean, the whole world now knows what PPE is. They all understand what supply chain is. So, unfortunately, through this horrific experience, people have learnt the importance of their supply chain. So I think it's actually going to be easier for professionals moving forward to explain the reason why we need transparency of our supply base and clean data, and we need risk management procedures in place, and we need analytics, and we need to think about inventory and visibility and control towers. And I think it's going to be a lot easier to sell, our needs and our strategies moving forward. And I think there'll be a lot more respect for what people do, as there will be for, health workers and people who've really helped save our community. There's a newfound and well-deserved appreciation of some of these roles that will endure.
No, absolutely. And I could not agree more. In terms of then trying to end, not on a lighter note, because that was quite a light note to end on there, but in terms of one question I'd like to ask everybody, which I think now is a little bit more difficult, because obviously with what's happening, that's kind of almost ripped up everyone's idea of what is a key piece of advice to succeeding or anything like that. But as best as possible, if you were to speak to a procurement professional who's starting out today, or even yourself once upon a time when you were starting out procurement, based on what your experience, what's one piece of advice you could give? Not necessarily to say, well, this will make sure that everything goes to plan, but just it's guidance that you think would be just something that would be key to follow for the rest of their careers. So no matter how tough things can get, that one piece of advice will be enough to sort of help them think, okay, there's hope, there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Look, my view is keep presenting ideas, and that's what I've always done throughout my career, and I'm even doing right now, is we are presenting ideas to our partners. What about this? What about that? And that's what the C-level wants. They don't want people sitting there just nodding. They want, well, actually, it's very nice to have a compliant employee every now and then, but, they want people with ideas. They want people with energy. They want people with solutions. And, in times like this, nobody has the right answer, but we need people with ideas to put forward. And that would be my number one advice, is just to keep presenting ideas and asking questions. What if we did this? What if we did that? And to have the courage to sort of lean into those conversations and deliver, because there's nobody in the business, bringing this conversation full circle, Dale, that has the breadth and the scope of the information that you do in your role. So you'll know what's happening in manufacturing operations, you'll know what's happening in the supply base. So you've got invaluable information that can really help decision making. So you've got a lot to add, and add a bit of energy and some ideas with that, and you'll find that you've got more than a seat at the table. You might be running the place.
And final question, for anybody who wants to know more about Procurious, to kind of get involved and just learn a bit more about it, what's the best way they can get involved?
Oh, well, thank you, Dale. Just www.procurious.com. Do we even say www anymore? I mean, it seems really old-fashioned. Just, Google Procurious. You should get a load of information.
Fantastic. Tania, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Insight Podcast in association with the Interface.net and CPOstrategy.com. The Digital Insight is brought to you by B2E Media Limited. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe, rate and review. And don't forget to check out our podcast archive at www.b2e-media.com/The Digital Insight.